If I've never met you before, my name is Russell. And until for the next hour and a half, I get the privilege of serving as your worship and outreach pastor. Hey, I don't mean I'm gonna preach for an hour and a half. Until 1 o'clock today, I get the privilege of serving as a worship and outreach pastor because my wife and I have accepted the call of God to step out in faith and to plant a church. And what I wanna try to do over these next few moments that we have together is to build your faith. But let me start with, how many of you guys have ever played the game Two Truths and a Lie? Okay, just be honest. Listen, don't lie in the house of God, all right? We're just gonna play two truths right now because I don't wanna lie in front of Jesus. Is that all right? These are two things that are true in my life. Number one, fundamental, absolute truth for me. Jesus is trustworthy. Can I get a witness in this place? God is faithful. Like I serve a God, we serve a God who can do what he says he can do. He is who he says he is. His word always comes to pass. If he is for me, then who can be against me? Amen? Like that is truth. I don't often doubt Jesus. But the second thing that's true in my life is I still wrestle with doubt. Was that just me? But what I've discovered over these past few weeks is that my doubt really hasn't been in Jesus, it's been in myself. Because my focus has been on the wrong thing. Can we go there today? Is that okay? The doubt that I wrestle with is in my own inabilities and inadequacies. And because I, like most humans, if we're honest and very self-centered, I often focus on my inabilities rather than his ability. It's not that I doubt him, but when I look at the realness of my circumstance, I struggle with doubt. And so what I want to try to tackle together today is the tension that maybe you find yourself in as well. And so we're going to look at a familiar passage of scripture, and really regardless if you grew up in church or not, at some level, you've probably heard of the story of Peter walking on the water. And so we're gonna look at Matthew's account of that in Matthew chapter 14. We're gonna be in verses 22 through 33. And as we're turning there, I just wanna set us up a little bit, give us context on who is this Peter guy? Because I would like to say for me that I am like David, you know, a mighty warrior, a man after God's own heart. I would like to say that I'm like Stephen, the first martyr, like I stand for what's right. I would also like to say that I'm like Paul, full of wisdom and knowledge. But more often than not, I am like Peter, a knucklehead who often does things and speaks without thinking. Like I relate to Peter. Peter is a man of very high highs and extremely low lows. Like this is the man who would say, Jesus would ask, who do you say I am? And he says, you're the Messiah. And he's like, you got it. And then just like a few days later, he would say, Jesus, you can't die. And Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan. High highs and low lows. Peter was a fisherman, which contextually tells us a lot about his character and his nature. He was brash. He was rugged. He probably was very foul-mouthed. He was a hard worker. But he came from a different socioeconomic class than other people that he grew up with. He had to work. And most theologians would actually agree that all of the disciples were probably teenagers. So not only is he uneducated, he's young. But despite all of that, who was the very first disciple that Jesus ever called? Simon Peter and his brother Andrew. As if to say to Peter, hey, Peter, I see something on the inside of you that you can't see yet. In fact, Jesus probably saw something on the inside of Peter that didn't even exist yet. And he was telling him, if you would come and follow me, I will begin to foster that thing to grow on the inside of you, but I need you to trust me. So here we have Peter, who gets it right and gets it wrong. And we're gonna pick up today in Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. It says this, immediately after this would follow the feeding of the 5,000, which during this time only men were counted. And so there was probably upwards of 15 to 20,000 people, like an incredible miracle. Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and there was 12 basketfuls left over. So immediately after this, Jesus insisted. Highlight that, circle that, underline that. Just find a way to draw attention to that word. Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. It do be like that sometimes. Turn to your neighbor and say, it do be like that sometimes. See, they didn't find themselves caught in a storm because getting out there was their idea. They were caught in a storm, and whose idea was it? Jesus insisted that they go. How often does it feel like, okay, Jesus, like I am to the best of my ability doing what you've asked me to do. Why is it storming around me? Like, what is happening, Jesus? They're in trouble and they are far away from safety and land in this storm, which was very common in this region, that these storms would show up. It's a lot like Tallahassee. No one really told me moving in that if you see one storm cloud in about 5 minutes, it's gonna be a torrential downpour and you might get struck by lightning. Just warn me next time, okay? I wasn't prepared for it. But in the same way, these storms would form suddenly, and they were fierce like hurricane-force winds. And these disciples weren't in a yacht or a speedboat. They were in an oversized canoe, fighting for their lives. It says they were in trouble, like serious trouble. Verse 25. About 3:00 in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." Like that was the only logical explanation, because they understood and we understand that it is humanly impossible to walk on the water. So the only thing that can be coming towards us right now would be a ghost. And of all the ways that Jesus could have handled this situation, he chose to walk. See, just a few chapters before this, there is another instance where the disciples and Jesus are on a boat. Jesus is taking a nap and a storm comes. And with just the mention of a word, the storm is stilled. So Jesus, from the shoreline, knowing that his disciples were in trouble, he could have just calmed the storm. He could have caused their boat to supernaturally just show up on the other side. He could have appeared in the boat with them. There's a lot of things that Jesus could have done. But instead of doing any of those things, Jesus came walking on the very thing that threatened to destroy them. Here comes Jesus walking on the thing, proving that he has conquered it, the very thing that might take their life. And I'm here to tell you today, there are things that you're facing that you think will destroy you. But we serve a God who's conquered it all. We serve a Jesus who is stronger than any storm that you could ever face. We serve a Jesus who is greater than any circumstance you might find yourself in today. Jesus was proving this to them. Verse 27. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid. Like, they think it's a ghost. Don't be afraid. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage, for I am here. If you're taking notes today, I would encourage you to write down Exodus chapter 3. What Jesus was doing here, and in fact, in the original language, it could be translated as him saying, take courage, for the I am is here. And what we should know about Exodus chapter 3 is that Moses was walking along one day, and there was a voice that came from a bush that was on fire that didn't burn up. And it was God speaking to Moses. And he tells them, you need to go to Pharaoh and tell them to let my people go. And he says, who should I say sent me? And God responds, I am who I am. The disciples would recognize the language that Jesus intentionally uses here. And I know I've said this to you guys before, but if anybody ever tries to tell you that Jesus never said that he was God, they don't understand context. By Jesus saying, I am here, in the same way that at the woman at the well, he would said, I am the one you talk about. He was proving his divinity. But even deeper than that, he was letting them know, in the face of the great danger that you are going through, take courage, because I am with you. It's just like in Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear nothing, for you are with me. He was letting them know, I know you're going through it right now, but take courage, take heart, for I am here. Verse 28. Then Peter called to him, seemingly without thinking the next few words through. Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you, walking on the water. A couple things. I think we missed the fact that the reason Peter got out onto the water in the first place was his fault. Like he said, if it's really you, prove it. Tell me to come out there onto the wind and the waves that could kill me. If I were Peter, I would probably have a little more sense to be like, hey, Jesus, if it's really you, tell me what I ate for breakfast this morning. That's safe, right? No. If it's really you, can you tell me what my mom's middle name is? Tell me the last 4 digits of my social security number, Jesus, and I will believe that it's you. Anything but getting out onto the water. But I think what might be happening, it's possible that under the surface, Peter's been a part of a lot of incredible miracles up to this point. And Jesus has been speaking into Peter, telling him that there's greatness on the inside of him, telling him that one day the church will be built, that he will proclaim the gospel. And maybe he doesn't see it yet. Jesus is often saying things like, you will do greater things than I have done. And he's like, as if to test Jesus. Okay, if you really mean what you say, ask me to come out. Watch what Jesus says. He doesn't rebuke him. He doesn't like, bro, are you crazy? Now, the disciples were probably like, oh, gosh, Peter, here Peter goes again, just running his mouth. What is he doing? But Jesus in verse 29 says, yes, come, Jesus said. So Peter went over to the side of the boat and turned around to ask the disciples, hey, do you think I should really go? Oh, your Bible not say that? Oh, no, sorry. So Peter went over to the side of the boat and called his mom and his dad, and they said, do you really think I should do what Jesus is asking me to do? This is where oftentimes we get stuck. And really what we're looking for is people to validate our disobedience. We're afraid to step out in faith, but if someone can tell me that I was crazy and I didn't really hear from God, then we feel validated in being like, there's no way. Let me just chill here in the boat. It's a little safe. It's much safer right here. We'll turn to people that have zero semblance of faith because we know that they'll just tell us what we want to hear. Like, I feel like Jesus, like I've been saving this money for this trip, but I just feel like Jesus is telling me to give it to missions. And then the friends that you were going to go on the trip on and be like, no, ain't no way Jesus told you that. That's crazy. You got to come on this trip with us. What are you doing? Like, I feel like I need to talk to my boss about Jesus. And then your coworkers who are just as afraid as you, like, ain't no way, man. You can get fired. Don't do that. But we get stuck on the edge of the boat, on the edge of the greatest breakthrough and blessing that we might ever know. But we're afraid. And for many of us, the boat that we're in represents comfort. It represents what we know. And because we are humans, we don't like change. We don't like difficult. We don't like to do things that don't make sense. But is it possible that the boats that we find ourselves in today are insecurity? Like, I can't walk on the water. Like, there had to be something in Peter that knew, like, he understood, like, I might take a step and fall to the bottom of the ocean. But we allow sometimes our insecurities and our inabilities to keep us right here. The cost of stepping out is too great, but the cost of staying here is greater. So Peter went over to the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. Verse 30. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. The moment that Peter took his eyes off of the one who called him and onto the wind and the waves of his circumstances, that's when he began to sink. The moment that he stopped listening to the voice of Jesus in his life and began to look at the wind and waves of his inabilities and his inadequacies, that's when he began to sink. Like, it was just enough faith for him to get out of the boat. But Peter, like Peter often does, blows it. So you might feel stirred in this place today. And by the end of the service, you might be like, I'm getting out of my boat. Just know that you're probably gonna blow it when you get out. That's life, right? We're human, we're imperfect, and we're probably gonna get it wrong. But I love how Jesus responds to his failure. Jesus immediately reached out. Like, he wasn't like, hey bro, come on, man. Come on, bro, like, I'm gonna give you this floaty and you're just gonna float. You're gonna think about what you just did. Like, didn't you not see that you were walking on the water because of me? And you doubt? Like, immediately he reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? And I want to pose this question again to you today. I wonder if he actually doubted Jesus or he just doubted himself. That he was so focused on himself and what he couldn't do that he couldn't see what Jesus was asking him to do. Verse 32. When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. We can't miss the significance of this moment. Remember that there was a time, seemingly days or weeks before, that they were in the boat with Jesus, and the wind and the waves and the storm came, and they woke up Jesus. They cried out to Jesus, Lord, are you going to let us die? And in a word, he calmed the wind and the waves. And I believe that there's many of us in this place that have been going through storms where we've been crying out to Jesus. Jesus, where are you? Jesus, don't you see me? I can't make it. Peter didn't wait for the wind and waves to stop before he got out. The calm came as a byproduct of his obedience. Some of you guys in this place today have been struggling in your marriage and you've been praying, and I'm here to tell you today, keep praying, but maybe go see a counselor. Like, there are those of us in here that we've been struggling with finances and like, God, I just pray that you would supernaturally keep praying, but maybe it's time to apply for another job. Maybe it's time to step out in faith into the unknown, into something that we've never done before, because it was after he obeyed the word of God, then the storm was calmed. Some of you in this place have been going through it. And you've been praying. And please don't hear me say that prayer is not enough. Prayer is enough. But faith without works is what? It's dead. So maybe you need to go back to the last thing that Jesus asked you to do and do it. There are those of you in this place that Jesus asked you to serve. And we can come up with 101 excuses on why, like, Sunday is my only day off, like it's the only time I get to sit in church with my family, and there'll be people in our life, they're like, yeah, man, you're so busy, don't do that. But if Jesus has asked you to do it, do it. There are people in here that God has asked you to do some radical things. And I know it doesn't make sense. But quite possibly the storm that you're facing could be calmed on the other side of your obedience. But I'm here to build your faith even more today. You ready? You're in one of three places in this place right now. You're either in a storm, you're coming out of a storm, or buckle up because you're getting ready to go into another storm. So the storms are always going to come. It's not a matter of whether or not the storms will stop, because until we get to eternity, that's just the reality of this life that we live in. But what are you doing in the storm? Are you walking in faith and obedience? In verse 33, then the disciples worshiped him. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. I want to close with this statement. It's time to shift your focus off your lack and onto his goodness. It's time to take your eyes off of what you don't have onto what he does have. Like, do you think that I think that I'm qualified to go move 2.5 hours down the road to plant a church? I'm not. Do you think that I have the experience necessary? I don't. Do you think that I think that in and of myself, my abilities, that I have what it takes? I don't. But I didn't choose me, God chose me. Do you think that everybody in my life understands what I'm getting ready to do? Like, at 1 p.m. today, I don't have a job anymore. I've already put my 45-day notice in several weeks ago with my apartment complex. Like, we're going. But they didn't choose me, God chose me. So regardless of what I feel about myself, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, because if God chose me, that means he has identified something inside of me that if I walk in obedience, he will cultivate it and it will come to pass. I've had people like, oh man, I bet you can't wait to go. Can I just be really honest with you guys? I don't really want to go. It's nice having a job that every 2 weeks you get paid. It's nice having a place to stay. It's nice having comfort and safety. But more than anything, I want to be obedient. I don't want to miss what God is doing. Because you see, on the other side of your discomfort or your comfort is not only breakthrough and blessing, but there is someone waiting on the other side for your obedience. We're not going just because we want to try to build a cool church. We're going because we know that there are people in the Fort Walton Beach region that need Jesus. And it's not that there's not incredible churches. There are incredible churches there. But what we've seen over the last 20 years is population boom and church adherence decline. We need more churches. And there are people there that are waiting for someone to just say yes. I want to finish with telling you this dream that I had. The Lord confirmed, actually pre-confirmed what he was calling us to. So the long and short of it is, back in April, the Lord arrested my heart and my wife's heart as a part of the West Florida Ministry Network conference that had nothing to do with church planting, but someone got up there and shared their story about church planting, and I was weeping as if what used to be a dream was now a burden. And I knew that at some point I was gonna have to do this. And I knew that God was gonna have to get hold of my wife's heart, because she was the one that said, I will never do that. And we're driving home and we're just processing through what just happened, and we could both recognize the same moment where the same individual was speaking, where we knew that God was placing a burden on our hearts for the region of West Florida. And our next right step was to go have what I thought would be the most terrifying conversation of my life, to go talk to the pastor that just moved us here 9 months ago, to say, hey, God is calling. But instead, I was met with confidence and reassurance. And ever since that moment, he's been our greatest champion. In fact, he was the one that said, do you mind if I call Pastor Larry? And I was like, well, inside I was like, I was really hoping that this thing would take a couple years, so don't call Larry, because Larry's going. Like, Larry's moving. But I didn't say that. I said, sure. And so the next day, I get a call from Pastor Larry, and we meet the next week. And during this meeting, he tells us, just drive. He gave us a few areas to drive around to just see where the Lord was leading. And so we went. And he told us to be sensitive to the nudge of the Spirit. And so as we get into the Fort Walton Beach, Navarre, kind of like that far West Florida area, we began to feel the nudge of the Spirit. And the night before that I was going to meet with him again to kind of tell him what we were feeling, he was going to speak and say, are we on the same page? This is a good thing. I had this dream. And in this dream, I am at the West Florida Ministry Network campground. And now I've never been there before, but I knew that it was because Craig Hicks, who is the district youth director, was in the dream. So two and two together, I must be at camp. And I'm standing here talking to Craig, and there's leaders and there's these students like in this dormitory. And I walk out the door under this awning, and I look to my left. And about as far away as you can see, there was a passenger plane, like a Boeing 737, that was flying. And when it got right into my line of sight, it just dropped straight out of the air. And I was like freaking out. And I turned to Craig and I'm like, bro, like, are we gonna do anything? And he's like, man, it happens all the time. Like, don't worry about it, dude. Just stop freaking out. Seemingly moments later, a gray fighter jet flying from the other direction comes and like literally nose dives straight into the ground. And this one was a little bit closer. So I remember in the dream, like feeling the reverberations of the ground, like feeling the dirt on my face. And I'm like confused and concerned, and like a sense of urgency came over me, but nobody was doing anything. The last thing I remember before I wake up is there's a black fighter jet. Think like, stealth bomber. Even closer, comes and just drops straight out of the sky. And I like woke up and like almost verbatim, I was like, I've gotta stop eating cereal before I go to bed. Like too much sugar. I'm so dense, I couldn't understand what was happening in the moment. And I come in the next day and I talk with Pastor Emily, because Craig is her dad. And I said, listen, I had the craziest dream about your dad last night. It doesn't make sense. Like kind of hoping that she might interpret it, but she was like, stop taking melatonin before you go to sleep, bro. So that day I go have lunch with Larry, dense, doesn't even register in my brain that the Lord was speaking to me. And it wasn't until that night that I was meeting with Pastor Ryan and Pastor Mike. We were just kind of like, where are you guys at? What's going on? How's the process going? And then it was at like 5:01 or 5:02, and the only reason I know that it was at that time is because my phone, I got a text message from my wife, and if your spouse is anything like me, if I don't call her like right at 5, letting her know that I'm on my way home, she's gonna ask me, are you on your way home? I got the text, hey, you haven't called me. And I was like, hey, I'm in a meeting. I'll be out of here soon. Put my phone back in my pocket and I sit back, and it was almost like a ton of bricks hit me. And it was like, just outside of Fort Walton Beach is the Panama City Airport. Just about a half mile south of that is Eglin Air Force Base. And even closer to where we feel like the Lord is calling us, there's Hurlburt Field, which is a Air Force Special Forces base. There are people that are waiting on the other side of our obedience. And we are doing everything we can to walk in faith in this season, trusting that if he's called us to it, he will bring us through it. Where is the Lord calling you today? What is it that the Lord has placed on your heart today that you know it's time to get out of the boat and go?
Hey, thank you for watching today's message. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you're subscribed down below to stay up to date with all of Transformation Church's life-changing content. Make sure you like, comment, or even share if you enjoyed today's message and it had an impact on your life. You never know what one share can do to someone else's life forever. For all of our service times and service locations, make sure you check us out online at transformtlh.com. And hey, we would love to see your face in the place this Sunday.